Hello and welcome back. So in this lesson we're going to add one last major feature to our home page, which is when the user clicks on an image anywhere in the image, it will display it in a sort of preview mode so that the only thing displayed in the entire browser window is the image. And to do that we're going to need to add some state. So we'll use React useState for that. And we'll create this new variable selected photo, which will normally be null when nothing's been selected, but when we click on an item we'll call setSelectedPhoto and supply it with the photo data of the photo that's been clicked on. So to do that, notice that this image up here is currently surrounded by a div, but if we change div to a button, then the entire container for this image will become one giant button. There is a type property for a button, and if you see there are 3 different values for it. I'll just select the usual button. And now if I hover over this image, you'll see Where Mountains Breathe has now appeared in the center. That's because the photo title and description are inheriting new defaults from the button, but I can put them back. I can just say text left, and now you see they're back on the left. Now the main point of this button is to respond to clicks, so I'll put an onClick handler in using the onClick property. So I'll put a JavaScript expression in here, which is an arrow function, and what I really want is for that arrow function to call this function setSelectedPhoto. Let's do that, and it's going to pass to it the photo which is being displayed. Now setSelectedPhoto isn't actually available in Transformer, but we can pass it as a parameter like this, and we'll see that we've now got a parameter setSelectedPhoto, and this is its type. It's a function that takes a single parameter photo, which is either a photo or null, and it's a setter function, so it doesn't return anything. So let me just save this. And we can see now that the type checker is very happy. At least it's happy up at the top here, but if I scroll down we can see that the type checker is complaining about the function being passed to map. If you remember, map is expecting a function that takes 2 parameters, but we have got a function that's now taking 3. It's got this extra parameter. So we can solve that. We'll just change this to call transformer instead, and we'll define a call transformer function that takes the original 2 parameters, the photo of type photo data and the index of type number, and then we will call the actual transformer and we will pass it the photo and the index, and of course we'll also pass it this additional parameter here of setSelectedPhoto. So that should all work nicely. We don't really need this call transformer variable. We can actually, of course, just pass the arrow function straight in, which would be more typical syntax. And I would like to rename this array here. If I press F2, I can rename it to something a bit better, transformed images. I think we'll see a bit nicer. Okay, so let's just check this is working properly. If I come over here, I'll restart it for good measure and bring up the developer tools. I'll set a breakpoint just here after this useState value, and now if I click on Where Mountains Breathe, we can see that SelectedPhoto does indeed have a value of Where Mountains Breathe. I continue, and if I click on another image, Whisper in the Pines, and so on. So the setter is certainly working. I'll just put this away for now. So all we actually now need to do is to look at the value of selected photo. If it's null, then we will display this column data, and if it's not null, we will instead display a preview component. So let's just put that in place. I'll say if it's null, so I can say not selected. photo and this. That's the case, the normal case. And then if I say selected photo has a value, then again use lazy evaluation to display this preview component that we haven't yet got. So let's just write it. We'll just put a quick template in for now. Preview.tsx in the components folder, and I can use RAFCE, the snippet, to generate me just a simple template component for now. And I'm going to need to import this. So add import. And we should see that that works. So now when I, let's make this a little bit bigger. When I click on the image, I need to restart this, I think. When I click on the image, we see that preview is displayed. At the moment, it's underneath the header bar and the search bar. So we'll address that first of all. Let's come over here. All we need to do is give this div some styling. So I'll say class name equals, I'm going to change its coordinate system. If I say fixed, it's going to take its coordinates from the entire browser window. So then I can say inset naught, which will attach it to the top, bottom, left and right of the window. And I'll just give it some color so you can actually see what's going on. Let's see now. So we can now see that it's redisplayed the window, and this time it's got these new coordinates and it's attached to the entire browser window. So the next thing to do is to actually display the selected image inside it. So let's just go and do that. We're going to need some props to pass the image in. So I've got these actually prepared. So I'm going to pass in the selected photo, and I'm also going to pass in the setter. We can call this with null, which will sort of reset the state inside the home window. And then we need to destructure them and pass them into the actual preview component like this. And import photo data. Okay, so it's saying we're not using these, but we'll just ignore the squiggle under set selected photo for the time being. And I'm going to display an image that contains the selected photo instead of the preview text. So I'll say image like this, and I want it to contain a source equals the selected photo dot large. And typically we would say an alternative is the sort of image text. So selected photo dot title. And if I just display this, if I now save this, you'll see nothing appears because of course we haven't passed anything in. But I can attend to that. I can say selected photo equals selected photo and set selected photo equals, and again I can put them there. And now we'll just restart this and click on an image, and we can see we're sort of getting there now. We've got the image, but it's sort of displayed at the top, but we can fix that with a bit more styling in the image itself. So I'll say class name for the image equals. Now the combination of these three values, widthful, heightful and object contain, should ensure that the image is displayed. It will be in the original aspect ratio, and it will be sort of shrunk or grown to the correct size. So again, let's just click on an image, and we can see now it's sort of nicely centered and occupying the entire space available. I think it's a little bit ugly, sort of buttered up against the edges. So if we put a little bit of padding in that div, just to put some, the padding means whatever's inside needs a bit of space around it. And also let's just now attend to this color scheme. So let's say it's normally white, unless we're in dark mode. in which case the background should be black. So now let's restart, and we'll see when we're in light mode and we click on an image, we've got this white background, and if we're in dark mode and we click on an image, it's black. So the last thing to do is to be able to close the image, and as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to call setSelectedPhoto and pass it null, and that should flip the state back to displaying the columns. So to start with, I'm just going to place a button under that image like this and give it some text, close, and it's going to require some sort of on-click handler. So I'll say on-click equals, and it'll call setSelectedPhoto. So it's going to be an arrow function that calls setSelectedPhoto and sets it to null. So this should set the state back in the home page. And you can see I've saved the preview now, and the button is appearing over here. If I click on close, it does in fact work, but the positioning is less than ideal. Now we can reposition this button by using some styling. So let me say class name equals, and if I say absolute here, and then top 5, right 5, by marking it absolute, it's going to try to find a parent that's marked as relative. If it doesn't find one, it'll just assume the entire browser window, which in this case is exactly what we want. So now if I select this, you can see that it's put the close button up here. So that's not a bad start. I'm now going to change this to an X and just have an X appear at the top. Okay, so I'm now going to add some styling to the button. I'm going to add it both here and also to the button itself. I'm going to convert it to a span so I can be very controlling about precisely where that X appears. And you'll see the combination of these two, lots of styling, allows me to put this X in a sort of white pill, and also for it to have a hover effect. So if I hover over it, it becomes clearer. So we can briefly look at this styling. You can see what I've done. I've said that it's got Z ordering, which means it must sit in front of everything else, unless something has an even higher Z number. I've made it into a flex box, centering everything, hence this span will be centered. And it turned out that the X needed just to be moved a tiny little bit in the Y direction, so hence this translate here. I then changed the font size and appearance of the X to make it bigger. I then changed its opacity so that by default it was sort of 40% transparent, but when you hovered over it, it became 100% opaque, so you could see it really clearly, setting the transition effect to opacity so that it sort of transitioned over time. I made it rounded and I made the text black on a white background. And again, the white was just very slightly opaque. So that was all of my styling. So let's bring up a new Chrome browser, make it full size, and display everything. We can now see that when I click on an image, it goes full screen, and I can hide it with the button. And it also works in light mode. If I click over an image, it's all working very nicely. So with that, I will close this lesson and I will see you in the next.